Living in a quiet suburban neighborhood, I always felt secure. Our tree-lined street, with its well-manicured lawns and friendly neighbors, seemed the epitome of tranquility. But one stormy night, this sense of security was shattered in the most horrifying way imaginable. It was a typical Friday evening, and a thunderstorm was raging outside. The wind howled, and the rain pounded against the windows, creating a symphony of chaos that made the night feel alive with unsettling energy. My husband was away on a business trip, and our children were spending the night at their grandparents'. I relished the rare solitude, wrapped in a blanket on the couch with a hot cup of tea and a good book. The tranquility was abruptly interrupted by the sound of a chainsaw roaring to life. I jumped, nearly spilling my tea. Who would be using a chainsaw in the middle of a storm? I tried to dismiss it as a neighbor dealing with a fallen tree, but the noise was persistent and too close for comfort. Curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously approached the front window, peeking through the curtains. To my horror, I saw a man standing in the middle of the street, illuminated by the flickering streetlight. He was drenched from the rain, wearing a tattered raincoat with the hood pulled low over his face. The chainsaw in his hands gleamed menacingly, and the sight of it sent a chill down my spine. What was he doing here? And why at this hour? My heart pounded as I watched him. He moved slowly, deliberately, scanning the houses as if searching for something or someone. I quickly backed away from the window, my mind racing. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my fingers trembling as I described the situation to the dispatcher. They assured me that officers were on their way, but the storm might delay their arrival. The chainsaw's roar grew louder, and I realized with mounting terror that the man was coming closer to my house. I hurriedly locked all the doors and windows, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The thought of confronting him made my blood run cold, but I had no choice. I grabbed a kitchen knife, the largest one I could find, and positioned myself near the front door, ready to defend myself if necessary. The chainsaw abruptly fell silent, replaced by the sound of heavy footsteps on my porch. I could see his silhouette through the frosted glass of the front door, a dark, menacing figure. He knocked, the sound echoing through the house like a death knell. I held my breath, praying he would leave, but the knocking grew more insistent, more violent. "Open up!" His voice was rough and demanding, sending a shiver down my spine. "I know you're in there." I didn't respond, hoping he would think the house was empty. But then, the doorknob rattled, and I knew he was trying to break in. My grip on the knife tightened, my mind a whirlwind of fear and determination. The door shook as he pounded on it, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it gave way. Suddenly, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night, growing louder by the second. The man hesitated, then turned and fled into the darkness, disappearing into the storm. Relief washed over me, and I sank to the floor, my body trembling with adrenaline and fear. Moments later, the police arrived. I recounted the terrifying encounter, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. They searched the area, but found no sign of the man with the chainsaw. The officers assured me they would patrol the neighborhood more frequently, but the damage was done. The sense of safety I once felt in my home was irrevocably shattered. That night changed everything. I installed security cameras and reinforced the locks, but the memory of the man with the chainsaw lingered, a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk even in the most peaceful of places. The eerie sound of a chainsaw in the night would forever send chills down my spine, a ghostly echo of a nightmarish encounter I would never forget.
It was a night like no other. The rain pounded against the windows with a relentless fury, turning the world outside into a distorted, watery blur. I had just settled into my favorite armchair with a cup of hot tea and a novel, feeling snug and secure in the warmth of my living room. The rhythmic patter of the rain was comforting, a natural lullaby that made me feel at ease. Little did I know, This sense of peace was about to be shattered. The first sound that made me uneasy was a soft, almost inaudible thud. At first, I thought it was just the wind knocking a branch against the side of the house. But as the noise repeated, growing louder and more insistent, my pulse quickened. I set my book aside and strained to listen, my senses heightened by the creeping sense of dread. The thuds were now accompanied by a faint scraping sound, like metal against wood. Someone, or something, was at my front door. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. The rain outside seemed to intensify, as if to drown out the sinister sounds emanating from my porch. I approached the door cautiously, every nerve in my body on high alert. Peering through the peephole, I saw two shadowy figures huddled together on my front porch, their faces obscured by the darkness and the rain. For a moment, I hesitated. Should I call the police? Or was this just some neighborhood prank? But then, one of the figures pulled out what looked like a crowbar and began prying at the door frame. Panic surged through me. This was no prank. These men were trying to break into my house. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands trembling as I relayed my address and the situation to the dispatcher. "Please hurry," I whispered urgently, hoping the men outside wouldn't hear me. With the phone still in my hand, I moved to the kitchen and quietly retrieved a large knife. My thoughts were a chaotic mix of fear and determination. I wouldn't let these men harm me. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way, but with the storm raging outside, I had no idea how long it would take for them to arrive. The scraping at the door grew more frantic. I could hear the wood splintering, the lock beginning to give way. Desperate, I looked around for something to barricade the door, but the house offered little in the way of protection. My eyes fell on a heavy dining chair, and I dragged it over, wedging it under the doorknob in a feeble attempt to fortify my defenses. Just then, the door burst open, slamming against the chair with a force that sent it skidding across the floor. The two men stormed in, their faces now visible in the dim light of the hallway. They were gaunt and weathered, their eyes cold and menacing. One of them brandished the crowbar, while the other held a flashlight that cast eerie shadows on the walls. "Stay back," I shouted, holding the knife out in front of me. My voice wavered, betraying my terror. The man with the crowbar sneered, taking a step closer. "Put the knife down, and we won't hurt you," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. The next few moments were a blur of movement and noise. I swung the knife wildly, desperate to keep them at bay. The crowbar-wielding man lunged at me, and I slashed at his arm, drawing blood. He howled in pain, dropping the crowbar and clutching his wound. The other man rushed at me, but I managed to dodge his grasp, backing up into the kitchen. Just as I felt cornered, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The men exchanged a panicked glance before turning and bolting out the door, disappearing into the rain-soaked night. I sank to the floor, my entire body shaking with adrenaline and fear. Minutes later, the police arrived. I recounted the terrifying encounter as best I could, my words tumbling out in a jumble. The officers searched the area, but found no sign of the intruders. They promised to keep an eye on the neighborhood, but the damage was done. The sense of security I had felt in my home was shattered. That rainy night changed everything. I installed security cameras and new locks, but the fear lingered. Every creak, every shadow outside my window made my heart race. The memory of those men, their cold eyes and sinister intent, haunted me. I had survived, but the scars of that night would never truly fade.
Living in a quiet suburban neighborhood, my life was as predictable as the sunrise. I had a steady job, a small circle of friends, and a routine that rarely changed. That all shifted one night when I encountered a woman who claimed to know my past and future. The experience left me questioning reality and fearing the unknown. It was a cool autumn evening, and I had just returned home from a late shift at work. The street was unusually silent. with only the rustling of leaves and the distant hum of traffic breaking the stillness. As I approached my front door, I noticed a woman standing on the sidewalk, staring at my house. She was dressed in an old-fashioned, flowing dress that looked out of place in the modern setting. "Can I help you?" I called out, my voice tinged with unease. She turned slowly, and I saw her face, pale, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to look straight through me. "James," she said softly, her voice echoing in the cool night air, "I've been waiting for you." A chill ran down my spine. "How do you know my name?" She smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "I know many things about you, things you have done and things you will do." My first instinct was to tell her to leave, but something about her presence rooted me to the spot. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. She took a step closer, her eyes never leaving mine. "You don't remember me, but I have watched over you for a long time. I come from a place beyond your understanding, a realm where time and space are different." Her words sent a wave of confusion and fear through me. "You're crazy," I said, shaking my head. "You need to go." She raised a hand, and I felt an invisible force hold me in place. "Listen," she whispered, her voice now inside my head. 3 years ago, you made a choice that altered your path. You don't realize it, but that choice saved your life. Tomorrow, you will face another decision, and the consequences will be far-reaching." My mind raced. 3 years ago, what choice had she meant, and what decision was she talking about? "Why should I believe you?" I managed to say. She lowered her hand, and the force holding me vanished. "Because I know your dreams," she said, "the recurring nightmare you have of drowning in a dark sea, struggling to reach the surface." I felt my blood run cold. She was right. I had been having that nightmare for years, but I had never told anyone about it. "Who are you?" I whispered. "I am a guardian," she replied. "I cannot interfere directly, but I can guide. Be mindful of the choices you make, James. They will shape your destiny more than you know." With that, she turned and began to walk away. Desperation gripped me. "Wait," I called after her. "What am I supposed to do?" She paused and looked back over her shoulder. "Trust your instincts," she said, "and remember, you are never truly alone." I watched her disappear into the shadows, my mind reeling. The next day, I went about my routine with a sense of dread hanging over me. Every decision, no matter how small, felt monumental. By evening, I had nearly convinced myself that the encounter had been a hallucination brought on by stress. But as I walked home that night, I came across a child standing in the middle of the road, oblivious to the approaching car. Without thinking, I rushed forward and pulled the child to safety. The car screeched to a halt, missing us by inches. Shaking, I realized that this was the decision the woman had spoken of. The child's mother rushed over, thanking me profusely. I barely heard her, my mind on the strange woman and her cryptic warnings. The realization hit me. My life was intertwined with forces beyond my understanding, and every choice I made had the power to alter my fate. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The woman's words echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of the strange, scary, and creepy encounter that had forever changed my perception of reality. My once predictable life was now filled with uncertainty, and I knew that the choices I made from then on would be guided by a mysterious presence from another realm.